did not get to look at Romans 4 this morning, so if you want to go on ahead and open to Romans 4. We look at faith, and I'm sure that sometimes people probably say, how many lessons are you going to do on faith? I think that probably with love, probably faith and love are probably about the two most important topics we could study. Faith works by love, and God is love. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. So we should probably do our best to try and get faith and love accurate and get it down. And then right there behind those, I would say hope. But I will tell you, if you don't get faith right, you're probably not going to get hope right. Because if you don't know what your faith is directed toward, it's awful hard to have the correct hope. And as Paul writes to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 13, now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. But tonight we continue to look at the faith with Abraham. And Romans 4 says to us, beginning verse 1, he says, "What then shall we say that Abraham our father has found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something about which to boast, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now to him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt." And in the context of what we're going to see here in Romans 4, it specifically is going to address faith relative to the initial birth of Isaac. But I want you to consider that Abraham's belief in God that began with the belief in the promise that of him would be a great nation, and in him would be the blessing of all the nations of the earth, that Abraham's belief in God, his belief that what God said was so solid, while it covers that one area of the things that do not exist as though they do, that it transcended, it began to cover every area of his life. And so that when you and I look at Abraham, and honestly, when you look at the life of Abraham, you have, quote, three major fail points. One with the king of Egypt in Genesis 13 there, Genesis 12 and 13. That as chapter 12 closes out, remember he says, "Oh, she's my sister." And the Pharaoh had already given him the dowry money. And again, this is one of those that I want you to think about, because at the time that this happens, Abraham is 75, Sarah's 65. Now, I'm not saying that there's not some very attractive 65-year-old ladies out there. Okay? I don't want anybody to leave and go, "Brother Brian thinks everybody who's 65 is old and wrinkled." No. But consider, as we've talked about before, that people saying that Abraham was just a poor wandering shepherd and he just barely scraped by on everything. The king of Egypt knew that this guy who was in his territory had the potential to put together and be a force with which to reckon. And when you look at what was appealing about Sarah as a sister, sisters and daughters have played a very big part in world politics, a huge part. The entire 11th chapter of Daniel will detail the intrigue prophetically within the Ptolemies and the Seleucids of the Greek Empire. And some of that will come down to daughters, some of that will come down to siblings, all that kind of stuff. If you have ever studied the history of Rome, what was called the first triumvirate. Now, I don't expect you to remember these fancy Latin words, but there were three guys that they agreed to get along for politics, money, and control of Rome. One was named Pompey, one was named Julius Caesar, and the other was named Crassus. And Crassus was the Roman general that kept the two of them kind of at peace on the power side of things. Pompey was in Rome, Caesar was in France, and Caesar had a daughter. And his daughter was the wife of Pompey. Well, it's really hard to go to civil war when you have a powerful general in between two of you that says, I'll beat you both up if you don't behave. And then the other two, if I go against him, then I got strife with my wife because she's his daughter, and you have all this intrigue, right? And when you want to understand what triggered Caesar to cross the Rubicon historically, it was when his daughter died unexpectedly. Caesar tried to offer another female family member in marriage, and Pompey goes, no, I'm done with this alliance. You can keep your women. And that was when he went on ahead and moved politically against Caesar in Rome. That the only thing Caesar had left was civil war. He said, what does that have to do with Abraham? When you look back and you see, why did Pharaoh say, wow, I need to have this 65-year-old lady in my house? Because they have no kids. So Pharaoh knows either Abraham can't have kids or Sarah is infertile. He makes that deal because he knows, he sees in Abraham a force with which, that if he doesn't make a peace, there's something there with which to be reckoned. And so he loads him up with all these blessings. And when you look at the life of Abraham, and I remember when we studied Genesis in school, everybody couldn't understand. They said, how come God blessed Abraham for lying? Remember, I've told you before, if you ask the wrong question, even if you get the right answer, it's still the wrong answer. The wrong question was, did God bless Abraham for lying? God didn't bless Abraham for lying. When you go back to Genesis 12, the Lord said what? Whoever blesses you, I will bless. Whoever curses you, I will curse. Pharaoh wanted something from Abraham. Yeah, go grab it. Okay, Tom's got it. Pharaoh wanted something. He was willing to give Abraham an extremely high level of wealth and prosperity in order to make this political alliance and marry his sister. Now, we all know Abraham what? Did not tell the truth. Yes, technically she's his half-sister. And when people get upset about that, I want you to think about how not very long ago in Europe that half-siblings married in royal families and in landed gentry, even in this country. Half-siblings. Because that's how you kept the land and you kept the money all in the family. That's how you did it. And so Abraham's half-truth, or Abraham's full lie, whichever way you want to look at it, Pharaoh cuts that deal with him. And remember, the Lord addresses it to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, hey, look, man, he told me this. I don't want a problem with whatever God is over him. And Pharaoh said what? He said, leave him the money, leave him the livestock, send him on his way and bless him. I don't want to be at odds with him. Pharaoh blessed Abraham because he wanted something out of the deal too. Now I talk about this because Abraham was just beginning his faith walk when he didn't trust God. Remember, the Lord said, get up and go to a land I'll show you, but make sure you leave your kinfolk behind. But he took Lot with him. So the Lord still hasn't shown him. And the Lord wasn't the one who told him to go down to Egypt. Abraham was the one who told himself to go down to Egypt. And so we have this thing in Abraham that as you look at his belief level, and you look at his couple of times of glitches, the other one with Hagar, and give you 3 guesses where Hagar most likely came from. Egypt. She was part of the dowry package. Had he not gone to Egypt, there would have never been a Hagar problem. Never would have been. And so you have that one, and then right before the Lord changes Abraham's name, cuts the covenant, and does all that stuff with him, in year 98, Abraham goes and he lies to Abimelech and says, she's my sister. Because at 100, and I've wondered about that one for a while. Why did he lie? He's already done battle in the Valley of the Kings. Everyone in the region knows he can defeat 5 kings with his men, with his standing military. So what was there in Abimelech that caused Abraham to have a moment of fear again? We don't know. But I want you to keep that in mind. When you start to react out of fear, hit stop. Because fear will almost never move you in faith. Fear will almost never move you in faith. We sing the songs, and Tommy led us off with a great song. To God be the glory. Great things he hath done. Hanukkah. I can't say Gesundheit because that's the German blessing that crams your soul back in you as it's trying to escape. You say, no, that's actually where that comes from. Yeah, the Germans believed your soul was escaping, so telling them Gesundheit crammed it back in you. Those crazy Germans. But why do we go back? The Lord tells us, rehearse the Lord's faithfulness. Rehearse the Lord's great works. Put each other in memory of it. Why? How long does most of our memories actually last? Okay? Yeah, we won't ask you, Phyllis. Right? Okay? Brother Rich, do you remember in the late 70s when they were predicting the new ice age? You say, Brother Brown, there you go again. Remember, you're early Gen X, I'm late Gen X. I remember being a kid terrified because I had sat through where the house had 4 foot of snow around it and more snow was coming. And they said, you know, we might have 100 or more years of winter. And as a kid I thought, dear God, please let me die now. Winter is great for 5 months. A winter that doesn't stop, just no. And you say, why you bring that up? The number of people I grew up with that actively believe climate change, as in hairspray and Al Gore's cows, are why that planet's getting warmer. Right? Because everybody forgets, in the late 70s, it was the planet's cooling and we're fixing to go into a new ice age. Everybody forgets that one. And I mean, I got so many things I remember of that kind of stuff. So I learned to not trust and believe anything my government said as a child. Right? And you say, no, I rehearse those things. Every time I start to believe my government, I rehearse every time they've lied, cheated, robbed, stolen, killed, or murdered our people. And I remind myself, government is not my friend. It may not be my enemy, but it's not my friend. Well, guess what happens on the flip side with the Lord? If the Lord can take you off of remembering, if the devil can take you off of remembering the Lord's faithfulness, the Lord's goodness, the 1,000+ pages of archaeologically, historically proven fact of what God has done in the past, and if you don't keep in front of you what he's done in the present. All it takes is a little bit of fear, and the devil gets in, and he can move your mind off of belief and faith into fear and unbelief. And that's what happened there, I believe, with Abimelech. And we remember that one. The Lord plagued and sent all, the Lord did all kinds of stuff with Abimelech, because we're getting close to the window where now Sarah's going to get pregnant, and the Lord does not need any doubt about who the father is. And Abimelech sends them out and says, y'all go with a blessing. Those are the 3 times in the life of Abraham. That's it. 3. So that when it says to us there in chapter 4, verse 3, Abraham believed God, and it was accounted. It was put on the books as though his account was paid with righteousness. Now to him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt. He had to believe in what he had no real part in. Do you understand the entirety of Abraham's action of faith in giving birth to a child? That the entirety of his works was to spend time with his wife in private? That's it. You can't force a child any other way. It doesn't work. They tried to force it a different way. It didn't work. Staying with the same wife for 25 years with no children, no sign of children. Believing that she's the one that he's designated. And this is where I believe people go wrong when they say God could have picked anyone if Mary would have said no. Do you realize if Sarah would have disagreed, there would have been huge problems here? Because there wasn't a different wife for Abraham in the works. The blessing was through Sarah too. Go on ahead and skip down to verse 13. For the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void, and the promise made of no effect. Because the law brings about wrath, for where there is no law, there is no transgression. Therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed. Not to those only who are of the law, but also to all those who are of the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. Now we sing the song. We sang it during VBS. Father Abraham had many sons, right? Just so you know, you do not have to pay for a high-priced gym membership. If you will sing that song 3 times through each day, you will have as much exercise as a 40-minute aerobic high-impact workout. And if you don't believe me, we can sing the song right now. And at the end of one, right, you'll be like, brother, we ready to sit down. I don't lead that song. I quit leading that song a long time ago because it was too much like work. But Abraham's the father of us all. Right? Now Romans doesn't really drive at home Sarah's faith, so flip over and see Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 11. Because I want you to see our mother's faith. Father Abraham and Mother Sarah. Hebrews 11:11. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed. By faith Sarah. You know, as you look through that whole big long list, You realize the only two women whose story is mentioned is Sarah and Rahab? They're the only two. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past age. And what was her faith in? Because she judged him faithful who had promised. Her ability to bear a child was received by faith because she judged God faithful in his promise. Now, someone invariably says, well, but Brother Brian, I thought she laughed. Didn't she laugh and not believe the Lord? She laughed at the utter ridiculousness of it when she was 90. Everyone who's ever asked me that question has never been pregnant at 90. None of them. Right? They're like, how could she not believe God? Well, if you end up 9 months pregnant at 90, then ask me that question. And no one ever says, I want to be pregnant when I'm 90. All right, Phyllis is out. She's like, I don't want no more kids, especially not now. All right, so far, all of my ladies who are 60 and up are shaking their heads no, they don't want any new babies this month or this year, this next calendar year. And I say, think about that when you judge Sarah's faith. She had a moment where she basically fell down at the utter ridiculousness that him being 100 years old, her being 90, they've been trying this thing for 25 years and nothing. And the Lord called her out on it. And she's like, no. So she lied to the Lord. Be honest. If the Lord was sitting having steak with your spouse and heard you laughing behind a curtain and called you out, might you not go, no. No, brother, I would definitely tell the truth to God sitting right there in my living room. I don't know that everybody would. Right? And here's your test. Here's your test on whether or not you know if you would do that. Have you ever said something that a spouse or an adult parent or an adult child heard that they said, what'd you say? And you said, nothing. Thank you. You in the Sarah boat. You're in the Sarah boat. You're in the Sarah boat. Oh, yes, you are. I'll put you in the boat even if I have to buy you the ticket. But even in that blip, even in that brief moment, what? When God rebuked her, she didn't change that she had believed that God was faithful. She just thought it was ridiculous nonsense that at 90 she should give birth to a child. And let's be honest, it was ridiculous. It was. But God had a point to make. God had a nation that he wanted to bring about in this plan. But she could not have been anyone other than who she was. Because now look back at Galatians. So Galatians chapter 3, you have all the stuff about Abraham, right? You've got all the stuff about Abraham. Galatians chapter 4, beginning at verse 21. Now, I don't know what your Bible heading is there. Mine says 2 covenants. To me, it's bigger than 2 covenants. To me, this is the salvation history of the whole planet. It's bigger than just 2 covenants. He says, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, don't you hear the law? For it's written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a bondwoman, the other by a free woman. But he of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through promise. Because it's true. Ishmael was born according to the flesh. It was the wisdom of man and an act of flesh. That's how Ishmael came about. Isaac was purely through promise. Now, the next phrase is instructive for us. He says, which things are symbolic? This means there's a bigger lesson for us to see. For these are the two covenants. The one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. And if you actually study Roman history, what was called Arabia is that region that is on the eastern edge of the Red Sea, or the western edge of Saudi Arabia. What was it? Jeddah? The most recent pay-per-view for wrestling. That would have been in Arabia, you know. This is how Mount Sinai is not in the Sinai Peninsula. Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. They've got the thing fenced off, and they've had it fenced off for a long time. They knew it was there. Mount Catherine's, St. Catherine's monastery on what's allegedly Mount Sinai is not the actual Mount Sinai. But that's a whole different study. But he says Hagar is Sinai in Arabia and is bondage, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is earthly Jerusalem, and the whole Mosaic system was built on the flesh. 26 though, but Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. Symbolically, Sarah is the mother of all the faithful. Sarah is a symbol of Mary. Jerusalem from above is the symbol of the church. All these factors. And so when we look at these things and where faith is concerned, so that 17 could go on and say, rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor, for the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac, are children of promise. Being in Christ by faith makes us the children of promise. But he was born according to the flesh, then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, and even so it's this way now. So that when you come back to Romans chapter 4, and the lesson is about to be yours. So when you come back to 4:16, that he says, therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all the seed, not only to those who are of the law, not just to that which is of the flesh, but this next phrase, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, who's the father of us all. Abraham is interesting. Remember, we've talked about faith and belief. Your word will dictate your belief, and your word will tell what your faith choice is every time. Remember, the name Sarai means bitterness. Abram means mighty father. But once he changes his name to Abraham, right, he becomes father of many nations. Changes the name to Sarah from Sarai, and gives her a designation of, beautiful princess. So that the last year, so even 3 months before conception, when he introduces himself, he's now introducing himself. Hi, I'm Abraham. Everybody, oh, you're the father of many nations. Where's your kid? Well, he's coming. Where's your wife? Oh, that's my princess over there. Previously, he had to go, that's the bitter one. You know? To hold out for 25 years. Contrary to the way everything looks. But that last year, in both of their mouths, the promise becomes their name. Father of many nations becomes his name, and that was where the promise took root. One of the dumbest nursery rhymes they ever gave us in school, Rich. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Dude, you can beat me all day long. I'll heal from that. And if I hurt really bad, I can take painkiller. And I'll get up and go again. Words? And so when you look at the life of Abraham, when you look at his faith, he took action on what he understood, and he didn't speak contradiction into his own life on what he didn't. He said, what about Hagar? That was him and his wife in a moment where what? They didn't listen to the promise. They got scared. And I want you to always remember that. Even some of the great heroes of faith had scare moments. So, we've been doing this for 13 years and God hadn't done squat. Right. Well, congratulations. You just added 13 more years to your time. Because for all you know, it might have been next week that he was ready to flip the switch. But you just had to go and shoot your mouth off, didn't you? And anybody who's a parent, you know that game. You were ready to do this, and your kid did whatever. Huh? All right, 6 months from now, we'll talk about it again. I'm sorry. I didn't mean a word I said. What do you know? They meant every word they said. They're crying, why? Because they know they meant every word they said, and now they don't want to lose what they didn't know they were going to get until you told them they were going to get it, because they didn't believe they were going to get it, and now they're upset that they ain't getting what they didn't believe for in the first place. That's all right, Shirley. Shake your head and play it back a couple times on the replay. For you and I, faith with God. Means that whether or not our eyes can see it, our ears can hear it, or any of our senses can perceive the reality that we're moving toward, that we hold the picture of it by faith. We keep the hope of it in our heart, and we make sure we put a seal on our lips so that our words don't sabotage our progress. And so as you and I go back out this week, right? Take a pause and just listen to how much unbelief comes out of people's mouths. And then take a pause and check how much unbelief might be coming out of yours. You know, Brother Rich, I've invited my cousin 794 times. He ain't never coming back to the Lord. He's going to hell. Ain't nobody can help him. Brother, would you pray for him? No. Why? You're his kinfolk. You done said 744 times now. Can't nobody help him. He's going to hell. He ain't savable. And you said it to him 741 of the 744. You understand those words? Faith words work, whether for positive or negative. So let's take a lesson from Abraham. Forgive yourself when you glitch. Keep the promise in mind. And when you reach a place of fear, pause and recenter on the promise. That's my word. word of encouragement for you this week. We're glad you're here tonight.